Hey y'all, Sarah Morgan of the Instagram account Cooking with the First Ladies. Today I want to talk a little bit about Eleanor Roosevelt and food rations during World War II, as well as share some recipes and a fun activity that you could do at home in order to get yourself to experience life in the 1940s. We'll be talking a little bit about Eleanor Roosevelt's famous 7.5-cent meals, as well as sharing a whole wheat bread recipe that was developed by her longtime friend and White House cook, Henrietta Nesbitt, and also a surprise vitamin-rich lunch treat. And share a few canning and gardening recipes and ideas so that you can feel like you're supporting the patriotic war effort and really put yourself in the shoes of American housewives in the 1940s. Of course, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, thrust the United States into the war. And basically overnight things changed for families as goods and foods were starting to be rationed. By May of 1942, prices were frozen on almost all everyday goods, starting with sugar and coffee. By the fall, meats and cheeses and fats and butters were added to the list alongside canned goods. Now, every American, including children, were entitled to a series of war ration books, which includes stamps they could use to buy the restricted items along with additional payment in order to discourage hoarding and ensure the equal distribution of scarce resources. 64 red points were given for meat, fish and dairy, and 48 blue points for canned and bottled foods each month. Sugar was the first and one of the longest items rationed and did not end until 1947, while most other food rationing ended in 1945. So here in front of me, I do have an example of 1 week's worth of rations for an adult in 1945, as well as some of what their rations were for the month. So you had about, for your adults, you'd have about 4 ounces of bacon or ham. You'd have about 8 ounces of sugar, 6 ounces of butter, 2 ounces of cooking fats, about 2 ounces of tea, which is just about the amount of 2 tea packets, as well as 3 ounces of cheese, and about a pound of jelly, which is about, several ounces. And then you have your points for your canned goods, etc. You'd get 3 pints of milk a week, which equal to about 6 cups, as well as 3 eggs. If you were pregnant, etc., you could qualify for more, as well as children, and the children actually could get oranges. With the country suffering through the Great Depression and then shortages of war, Eleanor insisted on running the White House with the same economy that her fellow Americans faced. She said, "It is not fair to ask of others what you are unwilling to do yourself." With the Roosevelts, they adhered to mandatory rationing along with other voluntary wartime home front initiatives, including planting a victory garden. They also installed blackout curtains at the White House. And food in the Roosevelt White House was famously poor, which we will talk about here in just a moment. But I would like to share a personal story. I had interviewed both of my grandmothers this past week about some of their experiences in World War II with rationing and that sort of thing. My mama remembered her mother being an air raid warden who would go out about the neighborhood and make sure everyone's lights were turned off when they were supposed to be. And she remembers as a little girl getting in trouble because she left the light on even though the curtains were closed, and that really infuriated her mother. Back to the White House. After dining in 1957 with the Roosevelts, Ernest Hemingway wrote a letter. He said, "We had rainwater soup, a rubber squab, a wilted salad, and a cake some admirer had made, very enthusiastically, but an unskilled admirer." He learned to take up what most other people who attended dinners at the White House would continue to do, and that would be eat a couple of sandwiches before attending your actual meal. Now, what is rainwater soup? This is very strange, and it's very simple and very bland. It is literally just chicken broth with significantly amounts of water added to it. So really plain and really bland. Now, Eleanor and her longtime friend and White House cook, Henrietta Nesbitt, and Cornell University created the 7.5-cent meal. Eleanor Roosevelt admitted many unappetizing meals were served at the White House during that time, but it was done on purpose and in order to be patriotic. I also forgot to mention that I did not cook a squab along with the rainwater soup that Hemingway described, because that is pigeon. So anyway, Eleanor stated that during the war, they lived up to rationing strictly, and she required all of the food in the White House to be served on the same availability of rations and the same recipes that were recommended to American housewives across the country. So she very much stayed in solitude with them. Henrietta, though, tried not to skimp too much on food, as FDR was a 1940s foodie, and she did not want him to worry about food because he especially had many other things to worry about. So she tried to stretch especially the meat supply at the White House in order to appease FDR. Now here's a few of the 7.5-cent meals. First of all, deviled eggs, which were featured on the last video. However, she served them with mashed potatoes, a side of whole wheat bread, and tomato sauce, and a cup of coffee. This provided supposedly protein that was cheap, plentiful, and nutritional values that only cost about 10 cents a person to serve. She also served bread and butter sandwiches frequently as well. Most of the food choices, again, were based on nutrition and protein. The whole wheat bread recipe is based off of what Henrietta probably would have been making at the White House. And she loved it. Eleanor served this bread frequently, again with bread and butter sandwiches, etc. But this whole wheat bread recipe was known as a wartime loaf and did not include much beyond yeast, flour, a drizzle of oil or a spoonful of butter, and a few pinches of sugar. The top, put a little water on top of it and sprinkled it with oats. So really you weren't using a lot of eggs and different things like that. Another one of the recipes of her 7.5-cent meals was spaghetti with boiled carrots. 1 pot of water for the whole meal. The Roosevelts often served noodles with any type of meat or vegetable leftovers. Using leftovers was popular as to not waste any of your food. So really wanted to utilize everything you possibly could. Now, creative sides were also created, and they include odd preparations of fruit and vegetables. And remember the boba tea salad from the first video, so just very strange. They also enjoyed cucumber and cream cheese mini sandwiches, which that sounds delicious. But another strange side dish, or seemed strange, but it actually was really good, was pineapple slices that were rolled in mint. So the only recipe really I could find for this was putting a little crushed mint along with sugar. You mix it up. Be better if you had a mortar and pestle, and then you really just sprinkle it all over the pineapple. And it's a very simple kind of a dessert-based side. So you just sprinkle it on and it smells delicious. Now, 2 of the other things that were strongly encouraged during the 1940s was canning and gardening, which they called them victory gardens, and it was seen as symbols of patriotism and was heavily promoted by the government. The only problem faced by canners across the country was the lack of sugar. But if there was not enough available, sometimes they could request more if they were canning. People were urged to plant gardens to offset the food rations, add dietary vitamins, and support the war effort. It's actually estimated that in 1943, up to 20 million victory gardens were planted, and there was about 4 billion cans and jars of food produced in 1943 as well. So people were really following these. It's very easy to grow your own garden and do some canning as well. We grow tomatoes, peppers, okra especially. We made pickles, canned tomatoes, all sorts of things. They're a money saver as well as lower in sodium. There's also some things that you can grow that are actually regrown from items that you would purchase at the grocery store. So what you'll want to do is get just a little cup or teacups, or what I sometimes use, and you can regrow carrots as well as green onions. The green onions are especially easy, but once you chop your green onions, right like that, you take your roots, just like that, and you put them in your cup with just a little bit of water. Just like that. And you'll put it in a window or anything like that. You can also regrow carrots. Now my other grandmother, my Mimi, remembers not only living through World War II, but also the Great Depression. She remembers that her family always had a garden during those times. She was also a nursing student during World War II, and she remembers that she didn't know too much about rationing because she always felt she had enough that she needed. Now in 1942, during a trip to Europe, Eleanor Roosevelt was encouraged by the positive result of the Women's Land Army that it had on the agricultural outlook in England. So she actually lobbied for a system similar to that, so many ladies were going to work kind of farming and doing that sort of thing. They also distributed several wartime cookbooks, such as this one. This one actually belonged to my mama. Had creative solutions, ingredient substitutions to help you have the best possible healthy ways to feed your family during that time with the rations. They also commented on the nutrition because some described the vegetable garden, vegetable gelatin molds, such as, the one thing I'm very excited to share was the tomato jelly, vitamin-rich lunch treats. The cookbooks were also very lighthearted and encouraged positivity under the circumstances. Now this is a tomato gelatin, also called a tomato aspic. These gelatins were very popular and said to be very vitamin rich. You can make your own gelatin mold at home, really using any fruits and vegetables if you aren't a tomato fan. So this was very similar to any type of vegetable mold that you were going to put together. It contained just lemon flavored gelatin, tomato sauce, wine vinegar, salt, onion, hot pepper sauce, ground cloves, celery. Basically put all that together, freeze it, make sure you really grease up your mold, and then you serve this on a bed of lettuce. So any types of these molds were very popular and said to be pretty good for you. I did taste a little bit of this as my first time making a tomato aspic. It's actually pretty good. It kind of just tastes like spicy frozen tomato soup. So I encourage you to try it if you can, because it's just one of those very interesting 1940s type recipes that a lot of the ladies were making for their families. Little to you. Spending a week living on 1940s rations makes you really appreciate the difficulty and important roles of the housewives during that time, as well as gives you a firsthand experience of life during that time, which included Eleanor Roosevelt's White House life as well. In addition to experimenting with ration cooking, I made my own ration book, and you can as well if you visit the University of Delaware history page. If you find ideas while you're at home, you can make your own book here, and you can also try to live on 1940s rations each week and see if you can see how the housewives as well as Eleanor Roosevelt lived during that time. One final story about rations. My mama, who I mentioned earlier, was only 12 in 1942. She remembers playing on the sidewalks in the city and walking around and skipping to school. And because of that, her shoes were always wearing down. And in that time, shoes were one of the goods that was being rationed. So all of her family would save up their shoe stamps so that little Shirley could have her shoes. So go plant a garden, try some canning, make a ration book, and try some of these recipes inspired by First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. You can visit the First Lady's Library website to learn more about one of the most fascinating ladies in American history. So thank you all so much.